annual review, which we published in the first quarter of this year. We publish it every year, I suppose, for the last 30 odd years. I suppose myself, Tomas Kelly, I'm a director with AECOM, and I suppose for the last 19 or so years since I've been with AECOM and its predecessors, I've been involved in some shape or form in putting together our annual review. And I suppose essentially what we try to do is give a commentary on where the industry is at that point in time, and hopefully look forward to where things are moving in the next phase. And I suppose in January this year, when we launched this year's review, it was very much a relief to be able to stand up and give some positive news, where we've had many years of, I suppose, doom and gloom, and for the first time in a while we've had, I suppose, signs of a really robust recovery taking place. That's not to say it was not without its challenges, but so I suppose what I wanted to touch on were what are the key trends in the industry, the construction industry this year, and I suppose cover what are the key findings then in the other areas of the review that we looked at. We had some interviews with some key industry leaders. We looked at Northern Ireland and the market up there, and then just some other topics that we covered on. So I suppose if I kick off first of all with the industry itself and construction output. We probably reached it around the 12.25 billion mark in 2015, and that was probably somewhere in the region of a 15% increase on 2014. So certainly a sizable move and a welcome move. I suppose where is the growth? Where are the growth areas? Well, I think certainly Roger and some of the other speakers beforehand had probably alluded to, you know, large inflows of investment from multinationals and international investors has seen certainly a large commercial developments taking place in the Greater Dublin area particularly, and to a lesser extent in some of the other urban areas. Unfortunately, housing hasn't been one of those areas where we've seen a real takeoff, and some of our earlier speakers certainly have relayed the issues and the crisis that has probably emerged in the last 18 months or so in the housing sector. If you look at the non-residential planning permissions here, again, in thousands of square meters, it's interesting to see that agricultural buildings are by far the largest areas of planning permissions, is nearly 600,000 square meters, and commercial buildings half of that. So it's just sometimes we lose perspective and we think the commercial development in the urban environment is what it's all about, but there's a large other part of the economy that are driving, and the domestic economy that is driving activity in the construction sector also. And I suppose in terms of employment, again, Roger touched on it when we talked about, you know, does the industry have the resources to meet this increasing demand? And certainly if we look back a number of years back to 2007, when the peak of employment was in Q2, there was in the region of 274,000 people employed in the construction industry. Of that, 47,000 were non-domestic workers, so largely European labour, migrant labour working in the Irish construction industry, a sizable proportion bringing very valuable skills and expertise with them and deploying it on Irish projects. If we look at the equivalent Q2 in 2015, the employment in the industry was in the region of 126,000, so less than half of the 2007 peak, and of that, roughly around 16,000 were the non-domestic workers. So I suppose there is certainly the question is where has everybody gone, and I suppose we're a very mobile workforce, and certainly a lot of them travelled overseas and took advantage of opportunities in the Middle East, in Australia, Canada, and I think there is a job of work to do to attract that cohort back, and to a certain extent that is happening, but we will need to see it to accelerate if we are to meet the supersized ambitions that we talked about earlier. And in addition to that, I think we will need to also attract the non-domestic workforce again back to Ireland. I mentioned earlier a little bit about the housing crisis and the fact that unfortunately housing hasn't been part of that growth seen as of yet. And I suppose, apologies for the graphics, they don't work quite well, but in essence, if you look at the first 9 months of 2015, we saw somewhere in the region of 9,000 house completions in the private sector. And I had to check this figure a few times, but only 250 in the social housing sector. So I think the scale of the problems are there, and inevitably whatever solutions or combination of solutions that come out of the various working groups and industry efforts, I suppose, to address the crisis, we're going to have to see a significant shift in that, and that's going to take a little bit of time. It's not something that can happen overnight, but I think, as Kieran alluded to at the very outset this morning, it's going to require a multifaceted approach to address all of the, if we're going to address that crisis in particular. I suppose we talked a little bit. I talked a little bit there about the resources and the issues that may be facing the industry, and I suppose one symptom of that, or one result of that, may be in the area of tender prices. Obviously, if the resources aren't there, but the demand for the physical facilities are, then you're going to see a shift in tender prices, and we're starting to see a shift in tender prices in the last 12-18 months. We're in our annual review, we estimated somewhere in the region of 6 to 8% for 2016, a little bit less in the regions, probably about 5% to 6% average nationally. And as I say, partly driven by costs, circa 2.5% increase, but also some of it recovering margin, some of it just scarcity of supply of suitable labour. And so I suppose that the cost side of it is pretty much labour driven. We see general inflation is pretty low in Ireland and Europe-wide. So I think that as the demand for the labour resources increases, we're going to see that potentially accelerate. And I know certainly there are some well-flagged increases coming down the track in terms of the mechanical electrical sector, and I'm sure other trades likewise. And again, this slide here just shows the close correlation between tender prices and construction output and construction employment. So if your construction employment rate of increase, the green line, is not progressing or not increasing at the same rate of construction output, then you're going to see the construction prices take off, and rather accidentally acquired in the last 5 or 6 years, but it's key to attracting that international investment and foreign direct investment in particular, that we maintain a steady but sustainable level of competitiveness going forward. I suppose just to look at some of the other sectors, we talked a bit about housing and about the private sector. Public sector still is a very strong and backbone of the industry. During the downturn, it was critical and essential to maintaining it. We're looking at somewhere in the region of a 3.75 billion capital investment program from the public sector in 2016. Where I suppose that the slide here on the right just shows you kind of the key sectors, in which the next slide actually, I'm hoping that the slides will be made available online to attendees, but essentially what we're looking at here, two things. The 2016 to 2021 plan that the government published is showing a fairly modest increases in terms of real numbers, in terms of euros, going from 3.75 to 5.4 billion in 2021, with the bulk of that increase in the last couple of years. So it's fairly modest in overall euro sense, albeit it might accelerate to somewhere in the region 8 to 10% growth in the last couple of years, which would be appreciable. But I think there's been a number of commentators coming out recently and rightly identifying the fact that there is a serious need for increased capital investment from the public, even if that is only being used to help to leverage other private investment that Vincent talked about earlier on. I think it's essential to provide infrastructure there to help the development sector build off. Okay, thanks. Just to kind of wind down a couple of other aspects to the review. We interviewed a number of key people in the industry. Martin Shanahan, CEO of IDA Ireland, gave a very insightful interview, and I suppose the challenges that he and his organisation faces in terms of attracting FDI. And I suppose they're targeting 80,000 new jobs in the next 5 years. 70% of that is US investment. But residential availability in Dublin is starting to hurt in terms of creating that. And I think as someone based in Galway, myself, and we have offices in Limerick, Cork, Belfast, Dublin, certainly we see this is where the more regional cities and towns will show that competitive advantage that they may be able to bring to the fore. So Cork and Limerick and Galway certainly can bring added competitiveness with still the same level of high level of academic and educated workforce. Neil Gibson, Ulster University, talked about, I suppose, the challenges that they have facing. I suppose one plus side is that they have got devolution in terms of corporation tax from 2018, so they're likely to regularise it with a similar 12.5%. And obviously the Brexit word, it's already been covered. I suppose in terms of Northern Ireland, it's a much more sedate pace of growth, 1.32% type of growth, and it's probably likely to continue at that level. I have a number of charts here which I'm sure you'll be able to get from the pack of information that's available, which gives you some of the statistics on the Northern Ireland market. But I'll just flick through them for the purposes of today and to get back on track. In terms of the regions, I suppose, I think there is still a two-tier recovery ongoing. The Greater Dublin area is seeing the bulk of the activity. The other regions that, as I say, are starting to lift, certainly in the last 6 months. If you had asked me when we published the review back in January, I would have been more pessimistic, but back, certainly in the last 6 months we've seen certainly more signs of improvement in that. The public sector, as I say, remains as a key driver and maintaining that competitiveness. I suppose also within the review we have a number of articles in terms of looking at procurement strategies, public transport infrastructure and the changing workplaces. I think they're all part of, I suppose, the holistic looking at how we do things, the mobile workforce that we talked about earlier, and we're always doing things differently. So some key messages from the review: we're experiencing a robust recovery. I think we are facing new challenges in terms of competitiveness, tender prices, resources, and there is a new business dynamic emerging, I suppose, where everybody from contracting to consultants to clients are much more risk averse or risk cautious, and that approach is, I suppose, right across the industry, and it's something that we have to all be conscious of and attune to. I mentioned the key issues, so I won't rehearse those again, but on that note I'll sign off, but if there's any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.